The war was over. At least, that's what the world believed. On May 8, 1945, Europe erupted in celebration as the guns finally fell silent. In London, crowds flooded Trafalgar Square, singing and dancing beneath a sky no longer threatened by German bombers. In Paris, church bells rang for the first time in 5 years. In Moscow, soldiers fired rifles into the air while citizens embraced in the streets. Cities scarred by years of bombing breathed again. Prisoners stumbled from concentration camps, skeletal and dazed. Families wept with relief as sons and fathers returned home, or wept harder when they learned they would never return. The Nazi Empire, which had promised to last 1,000 years, had collapsed into dust and ash in just 12. And yet, far out at sea, beneath the cold grey waters of the Atlantic Ocean, one German submarine refused to surrender. Its name was U-977, a Type VIIC U-boat, a sleek steel shadow built for war, 220 feet of engineering designed for one purpose, to hunt and kill. It was commanded by a young officer who found himself staring into the jaws of history, caught between loyalty and survival, duty and common sense. His name was Oberleutnant Heinz Schäffer, just 25 years old, with a weathered face that made him look older, hardened by years of battle beneath the waves, and a heart carved by loyalty, fear, and the crushing weight of defeat. But on that quiet May day, when Grand Admiral Karl Donitz ordered all German forces to unconditionally surrender, Schäffer made a decision that would turn U-977 into a legend, a ghost ship whispered about in spy files, naval archives, and conspiracy theories that stretch from Europe to South America and persist even today. The world collapses. To understand U-977's escape is to understand the final, desperate breath of a dying regime. As Berlin fell and Adolf Hitler took his own life in his bunker on April 30th, Nazi commanders across Europe were suddenly cut loose from orders. The chain of command shattered like glass. Some surrendered immediately, relieved the madness was finally over. Others chose to fight pointlessly, spending their men's lives on battles that meant nothing. And a few, a very few, believed escape was the only option left. Among those was Schäffer, who received the surrender order through crackling radio transmissions as U-977 patrolled in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. The message hit the crew like a torpedo striking amidships. Men who had spent years fighting beneath the ocean's surface, launching torpedoes at Allied convoys, dodging depth charges that exploded like underwater thunder, felt their entire world collapse in an instant. The Reich they were sworn to serve, the nation they had sacrificed everything for, no longer existed. Their families were out of reach, scattered across a broken Germany now carved up by Soviet, American, British, and French forces. Their homeland was occupied by enemies. Their Führer was dead. Their navy was surrendering ship by ship across the Atlantic. And they were alone, a single steel tube filled with 50 young men, deep in hostile waters, with nowhere to go and no one to protect them. The submarine fell into an eerie silence as the news spread through the cramped compartments. Some men stared blankly at the bulkheads, their minds unable to process what they'd heard. Others broke down and wept openly, shoulders shaking, hands covering their faces. A few became angry, cursing the leadership that had led them to this point, cursing the war itself. One young sailor, barely 19 years old, whispered that he just wanted to go home to his mother in Hamburg, not knowing if she was even still alive. Schäffer gathered his officers in the tiny wardroom, squeezed between the captain's quarters and the radio room. The air inside was thick with oil fumes, sweat, and the metallic smell of fear. Outside the pressure hull, the Atlantic groaned and pressed against them. Inside, 5 men sat around a fold-down table covered with navigation charts, their faces lit by dim red emergency lighting. "Gentlemen," Schäffer began, his voice steady despite the chaos in his heart, "we have a decision to make." Surrender meant survival, but it also meant humiliation, imprisonment, and an uncertain fate. The Allied navies had hunted U-boats relentlessly throughout the war, treating them as pirates rather than legitimate combatants. Stories circulated among U-boat crews of submarines that had surfaced with white flags only to be fired upon by vengeful destroyers. Many surrendered U-boats were scuttled by their captains rather than handed over. Others were captured with their crews beaten, interrogated brutally, and thrown into prisoner-of-war camps where they were segregated from other German prisoners and treated as war criminals. Rumors, unverified but persistent, said that surrendering submariners were sometimes executed by angry civilians in British and American ports, lynched by mobs who had lost family members to U-boat attacks. Whether these stories were true or exaggerated didn't matter, the fear they created was real. Some of Schäffer's men had wives and children back home in cities that were now rubble. Others had nothing, their families dead, their homes destroyed, their futures erased. But one thing was clear to all of them: returning to Germany meant captivity, and captivity meant disappearing behind barbed wire for years, perhaps decades. The war crimes trials were already beginning. Nazi officers were being hunted down and prosecuted. U-boat commanders, who had sunk hundreds of Allied ships and killed thousands of sailors, would not be shown mercy. There was another option, a wild, dangerous, almost impossible one. South America. Argentina. A land across the world, a continent away from the ashes of Europe, where some Nazi officers believed they could escape justice. A land where whispers said President Juan Perón sympathized with Germans, where old comrades from the war could hide, build new lives, disappear into cities or ranches in the vast pampas. Argentina had maintained neutrality for most of the war and had only declared war on Germany in March 1945, a symbolic gesture that came too late to mean anything. But to reach Argentina, U-977 would have to travel nearly 7,500 nautical miles. They would have to cross the most heavily patrolled seas in human history, waters still crawling with Allied destroyers, corvettes, and aircraft carriers. They would have to stay submerged for weeks, running silently beneath ships hunting for any remaining U-boats that might try to escape. And they would have to do it with the world thinking the war was over, with every Allied sailor eager to claim the glory of sinking one last German submarine. The officers argued for hours. Some said it was suicide. Others said surrender was worse than death. The engineering officer worried about fuel. They had enough diesel to make the journey, but barely, with no margin for error. The navigator pointed out that they would have to cross the equator, pass through tropical storms, navigate without proper charts of the South Atlantic. The first watch officer said simply, "At least we'll die free men." When Schäffer finally asked for volunteers to attempt the escape, tension ripped through the entire submarine like an electrical current. He made an announcement over the intercom, his voice echoing through the compartments. Any man who wanted to surrender could leave. Any married man would be released. He would not force anyone to come on a journey that might end in death. The crew split down the middle. Some wanted desperately to surrender and go home, to find their families, to start rebuilding Germany, to put the war behind them. Others believed escape was madness but felt they had no choice. Returning to Germany meant prison or worse. After fierce arguments that nearly turned physical, Schäffer made his controversial decision. 16 sailors, mostly married men with families, would be put ashore. On a cold night, off the coast of Norway, U-977 surfaced in darkness. The 16 men climbed out through the conning tower hatch, carrying small packs with personal belongings. Rubber dinghies were inflated on the deck. The sea was rough, waves slapping against the submarine's hull. The men embraced their departing comrades, some crying, others silent, all knowing they might never see each other again. "Tell my wife I loved her," one sailor whispered to a friend who was leaving. "Tell her I tried to come home." The dinghies were lowered into the black water. The 16 men paddled toward shore, their silhouettes disappearing into the darkness. They would reach Norway, surrender to Allied troops, and be sent to POW camps. Most would return to Germany within a year. They would tell stories of U-977's last voyage, but few would believe them. The rest, 32 men, chose the abyss. Into the depths. At dawn, with the Norwegian coast disappearing behind them, U-977 slipped beneath the surface for what would become one of the longest dives in naval history. But this was not a normal dive, not the quick plunge to avoid a destroyer or the tactical submersion during an attack run. What happened next would enter naval history as one of the longest submerged voyages ever attempted by a conventional submarine, a feat of endurance that tested both machine and men to their absolute limits. Schäffer ordered a schnorkel run. The schnorkel, or snorkel, as the Allies called it, was a retractable mast with an air intake valve that allowed the submarine to run its diesel engines while remaining underwater. It was a relatively new technology, and many U-boat commanders didn't trust it. But Schäffer had no choice. U-977 would stay beneath the waves, hidden from radar and visual detection, running on its diesels with only the tip of the schnorkel breaking the surface. The crew sealed themselves inside a steel coffin, no fresh air except what came through the schnorkel, no sunlight, no escape. The submarine dove deep, settling into an eerie silence broken only by the steady throb of the diesel engines and the creak of the pressure hull. The ocean became their entire world. Days blurred into nights, though night and day meant nothing in the perpetual twilight of the submarine's interior. The crew lived by watch schedules, 4 hours on duty, 8 hours off, though off meant trying to sleep in cramped bunks stacked 3 high, surrounded by the constant noise of machinery and the smell of 32 men living in an enclosed space smaller than a city bus. Men slept beside torpedoes in the forward compartment, their bodies pressed against cold metal. They ate stale black bread, canned meat that tasted like rust, and hard biscuits infested with weevils. They collected condensation from the pipes for drinking water when their supplies ran low. They struggled to breathe the recycled air, which grew heavier and more toxic with each passing day as carbon dioxide built up faster than the air recycling system could handle. The smell was monstrous: diesel fuel, human sweat, mold growing on every damp surface, the stench of the single toilet that 32 men shared, and the thick fog of human fear that seemed to cling to every surface like oil. Men stopped bathing because fresh water was too precious. Their uniforms became stiff with salt and sweat. Their skin broke out in rashes. Their teeth ached from lack of proper food. Some developed scurvy as their vitamin reserves depleted. The engines throbbed endlessly, a mechanical heartbeat that never stopped, driving them south through cold Atlantic waters. U-977 crept like a hunted animal, guided only by Schäffer's navigation skills and pure luck. Above them, Allied destroyers still prowled the waters, their sonar pinging through the ocean depths, still dropping depth charges on any suspected submarine contact. Aircraft with magnetic anomaly detectors scanned the surface, hunting for the metal signature of a U-boat's hull. And all around them, on the seabed hundreds of feet below, lay the wrecks of destroyed U-boats, 120 submarines lost in 1945 alone, their crews entombed in crushed steel coffins, their bodies still strapped into their stations or floating in flooded compartments. U-977 stayed deep, deeper than the recommended safe diving depth, risking hull collapse rather than detection. At times, when destroyers passed overhead, Schäffer ordered the boat down to nearly 800 feet, far beyond the Type VIC's rated maximum depth of 650 feet. At those depths, the submarine became a torture chamber. The pressure was immense. Metal groaned like a living thing in pain. Bolts popped loose with sounds like gunshots, bouncing around the compartments. Welds creaked ominously. The hull itself seemed to compress, squeezing inward, and men swore they could see the bulkheads bending. Water began seeping through microscopic cracks in the pressure hull, dripping from rivets, pooling on the deck plates. The crew held their breath during the deepest dives, listening to their boat scream under the pressure, whispering prayers to gods many of them hadn't believed in before the war. Some clutched photographs of loved ones. Others stared blankly at the bulkheads, resigned to death. The youngest crew member, just 17 years old, wept silently in his bunk. But the boat held. German engineering, built by workers in Hamburg and Bremen who had welded every seam with precision, held firm. U-977 survived. The record. On the 60th day submerged, something extraordinary happened, though no one aboard realized it at the time. U-977 broke a silent endurance record. No submarine in World War II, German or Allied, had remained continuously underwater for this long. The previous record had been held by another U-boat that had stayed down for 51 days. U-977 shattered that mark and kept going. By day 66, the crew was at its breaking point. Several men had collapsed from carbon dioxide poisoning. Others showed signs of psychological breakdown, staring into space, muttering to themselves, refusing to eat. The chief engineer reported that the air scrubbers were failing, the batteries were nearly depleted despite constant recharging, and the hull had developed dozens of small leaks that required constant pumping. Schäffer made the decision to surface. On a moonless night in early July, somewhere near the Cape Verde Islands off the coast of West Africa, U-977 began its ascent. The ballast tanks blew with a roar of compressed air. The submarine rose slowly through the dark water, breaching the surface like a whale coming up for air. Fresh air poured through the hatches like a blessing from heaven. The crew climbed onto the deck in small groups, stumbling like drunks, blinking at a sky full of stars they hadn't seen in over 2 months. They were exhausted, pale as ghosts, half-starved, some barely conscious. Several had to be carried topside by their comrades. They stood on the deck, breathing deeply, lungs burning as they filled with clean ocean air. Some laughed. Others cried. A few simply collapsed on the wet steel and stared up at the impossible expanse of stars, having almost forgotten that a world existed beyond the submarine's steel walls. The ocean stretched in all directions, vast, empty, indifferent to their suffering. No ships. No planes. Only water meeting sky at a distant horizon. For the first time since leaving Norway, they were truly alone. Crossing the line. Now came the hardest part, crossing the equator and navigating the South Atlantic. U-977 headed southwest, hugging the African coastline to avoid the main shipping lanes, then cutting across open ocean toward South America. The journey became a new kind of hell. Tropical storms battered the submarine with a fury that made the North Atlantic seem gentle. Waves 30 feet high slammed into the hull like angry fists. Lightning tore across the sky in brilliant, terrifying displays. Thunder shook the air. The submarine pitched so violently that men were thrown from their bunks, crashing into bulkheads, breaking bones. Equipment came loose and tumbled through compartments. On some nights, U-977 plunged beneath the waves involuntarily, forced down by walls of water, surfacing only when the ocean allowed it. The heat was unbearable as they crossed into tropical waters. Inside the submarine, temperatures soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The metal hull became too hot to touch. Men stripped to their underwear but still sweated constantly, losing dangerous amounts of fluids. Some suffered heat exhaustion. The cook could barely function in the galley, where temperatures reached 120 degrees. During calmer days, they witnessed the strange beauty of tropical waters. Dolphins swam alongside the boat, leaping and playing in the submarine's bow wave. Flying fish landed on the deck, and the crew collected them for food, a welcome change from canned rations. Once, they passed through a massive school of Portuguese man-o-war jellyfish, their translucent bodies glowing in the water like ghosts. But the moments of peace never lasted long. The crew lived in constant fear, knowing that despite the war's end, they were still hunted. Every sound became a potential threat, every radar ping, every distant engine rumble, every unidentified shape on the horizon could mean death. Some nights, Schäffer ordered emergency crash dives as unidentified ships approached. The crew would scramble to their dive stations, hatches would slam shut, and U-977 would plunge beneath the waves in seconds, hiding in the dark water while surface ships passed overhead, their propellers chopping the water above like guillotine blades. Once, in mid-July, a massive aircraft carrier passed just 3 miles away, close enough that they could hear its engines through the hull. U-977, silent and unseen, slipped beneath the carrier's path like a ghost, running at maximum depth until the warship disappeared over the horizon. The crew didn't speak for hours afterward, each man lost in his own thoughts about how close they had come to being discovered. By late July, after nearly 3 months at sea, the crew began to fracture psychologically. Their hopes started to crack under the weight of endless days and uncertain futures. They wondered if the escape was worth the suffering. They wondered if Argentina would accept them or simply hand them over to the Americans. They wondered if President Perón's rumored sympathy for Germans was real or just wishful thinking. They wondered if the war's end meant everything they had fought for, all the friends who had died, all the sacrifices, was ultimately pointless. Arguments broke out over trivial matters: who got an extra biscuit, whose turn it was to clean the toilet, whether the schnorkel was making too much noise. Men who had been friends for years stopped speaking to each other. Schäffer had to intervene several times to prevent fights from becoming violent. But Schäffer himself, young but determined, kept their hopes alive through sheer force of will. He moved through the submarine daily, speaking with each crew member, checking on their mental state, reminding them why they had chosen this path. He believed that reaching Argentina was their only chance at freedom, even if that freedom was uncertain, even if it meant living in exile, even if the world would call them deserters or cowards. "We didn't surrender," he told his men, "because we're not defeated. We're survivors." Landfall. And then came the moment that changed everything. On August 17, 1945, exactly 101 days after departing Norway, U-977 reached the coast of Argentina. The vast shoreline rose into view like a dream through the periscope. Behind them lay 7,500 miles of ocean, a war-torn Europe, and the ashes of the Third Reich. Ahead of them stood a new world, strange and uncertain, but alive with possibility. Schäffer stood on the bridge as the submarine surfaced, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the horizon for danger. The crew gathered around him on the conning tower, silent, hearts pounding in their chests like drums. Some men wept. Others laughed hysterically. One sailor fell to his knees on the deck and kissed the steel, thanking God they had survived. But fate had other plans. As U-977 approached Mar del Plata, Argentina's principal naval base, the crew saw Argentine Navy ships waiting for them, destroyers and corvettes, armed and alert, guns trained on the approaching submarine. Word had somehow spread that a German U-boat was arriving. World War II had ended 3 months earlier, but South America was still on edge, caught in the crossfire of post-war espionage and Cold War tensions. Rumors had been circulating for months of Nazi officers fleeing to Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Paraguay, smuggled out of Europe by submarine, by cargo ship, by any means possible. Allied intelligence agencies monitored every coastline, every port, searching for war criminals trying to escape justice. When U-977 surfaced off Mar del Plata, Argentine authorities immediately notified the American and British embassies. An Argentine destroyer approached cautiously, its guns elevated and ready. Through a loudspeaker, an officer demanded U-977's identification and intentions. The moment was tense. Argentine sailors manned their weapons, fingers on triggers, waiting for orders. Aboard U-977, Schäffer's crew stood at their stations, exhausted and frightened, wondering if they had survived 7,500 miles only to be sunk within sight of land. Schäffer raised a white flag, a simple bedsheet tied to a pole. "We are U-977, Kriegsmarine," he called out in German, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "We wish to surrender to Argentine authorities." And with those simple words, the longest escape journey of any German U-boat came to an end. Interrogation. The crew was taken into custody immediately. Their uniforms were soaked with sweat and salt, hanging on their thin frames like rags. Their faces were gaunt, cheekbones prominent, eyes hollow. Their hands trembled from malnutrition and nervous exhaustion. Argentine naval officers inspected the submarine, stunned by the condition of both boat and crew. The submarine itself was a wreck, paint peeling, hull covered in barnacles and algae, machinery breaking down, the interior thick with mold and rust. Some crew members were so weak they needed to be carried off on stretchers and taken directly to the naval hospital. Doctors examined them and found severe vitamin deficiencies, dehydration, infected wounds, and psychological trauma. Several men had lost over 30 pounds during the voyage. But one question burned hotter than all others: why had they come? Argentina immediately notified the United States, as required by international agreements. Within days, American intelligence officers, including members of the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, forerunner of the CIA, arrived in Mar del Plata to interrogate the crew. British intelligence sent representatives as well. The world was in turmoil, and U-977 had arrived at the worst possible moment. Because rumors were swirling that Adolf Hitler had escaped Berlin. Despite Soviet claims that they had found Hitler's partially burned body in the garden of the Reich Chancellery, many people refused to believe the Führer was dead. Conspiracy theories multiplied like wildfire. Some believed he had fled by submarine to a secret Nazi base in Antarctica. Others believed he had escaped to Argentina, protected by sympathetic officials. Stalin himself told Truman and Churchill that he doubted Hitler was dead, suggesting he had escaped to Spain or South America. When U-977 arrived in Argentina 3 months after Germany's surrender, it became the center of one of the most sensational accusations of the post-war era. American and British newspapers ran wild headlines: "Did Hitler escape by submarine?" "Mystery U-boat stirs global panic." "Nazi gold hidden in South America." American interrogators, led by Commander John S. McCain, father of the future senator, suspected that U-977 had carried something significant: Nazi gold looted from occupied countries, secret documents, high-ranking SS officers, perhaps even Hitler himself or his closest associates like Martin Bormann. The timing seemed too convenient. The route seemed too deliberate. Schäffer was interrogated for hours, days, then weeks. He swore repeatedly that none of it was true. He insisted the submarine carried no passengers beyond its crew, no treasure, no classified cargo beyond standard naval documents. U-977 was simply a U-boat whose commander had refused to surrender and had chosen escape over captivity. "We carried nothing," Schäffer told his interrogators, exhaustion clear in his voice. "We are simply submariners who wanted to survive." The U.S. Navy conducted a thorough search of U-977, from the torpedo tubes to the captain's quarters, from the bilge pumps to the diesel fuel tanks. They dismantled panels, checked every storage locker, examined every inch of the submarine's interior with measuring tapes to ensure no secret compartments existed. They interviewed each crew member separately, looking for inconsistencies in their stories. They found nothing unusual. No gold. No documents. No hidden passengers. The submarine was simply a battered, exhausted vessel carrying 32 men who had refused to surrender. Still, the questions continued. Why had the voyage taken so long? 101 days to travel a route that should have taken perhaps 45 to 60 days. What happened during those 66 days underwater? Why risk crossing the Atlantic after the war was over? Why travel to Argentina instead of surrendering in Norway, or Spain, or any closer neutral country? Schäffer's answers were simple but controversial. He had wanted to protect his crew from Allied vengeance, feared the treatment surrendered U-boat crews were receiving, and believed Argentina offered the best chance for his men to start new lives without facing war crimes prosecution or indefinite imprisonment. "We spent 66 days submerged because we were terrified," he explained. "Every sound was a destroyer. Every radar ping meant death. We stayed down because it was the only way to survive." But the world was not satisfied. The interrogations expanded. British intelligence officers questioned the crew about their knowledge of other U-boats that might have escaped. Soviet representatives demanded access to the prisoners, suspecting a Western conspiracy to hide Nazi war criminals. Argentine officials found themselves caught in an international incident, pressured by all sides. Newspapers around the world spread increasingly wild headlines. Theories flourished, not just for years, but for decades. Some claimed U-977 was part of a massive secret Nazi evacuation plan called Operation Tierra del Fuego, smuggling war criminals to South America. Others suggested the submarine had stopped at a secret German base in Antarctica, part of a mythical New Swabia colony. Still others claimed Schäffer was lying, that he had carried passengers who disembarked secretly before reaching Mar del Plata. Schäffer denied everything, repeatedly, patiently, exhaustively. Decades later, he would write a memoir, U-977, 66 Days Underwater, describing the voyage in meticulous detail, including daily logs, navigation calculations, and personal reflections. Historians studied his accounts carefully. Naval experts analyzed the logs and found them consistent with his story. Oceanographers confirmed that the route he described was possible, if extremely difficult. Engineers examined the submarine's fuel consumption and determined that U-977 could have made the journey on its available diesel supplies, though with almost no margin for error. Most experts eventually concluded that the submarine was exactly what it appeared to be, a lonely steel tomb carrying frightened men seeking a future in a world that had ended around them. But legends evolve where facts fail. And U-977 became more than a submarine. It became a symbol of desperation and survival, of adventure and mystery, of the haunting shadow of a war that refused to die quietly, of conspiracies both real and imagined. Aftermath. After 6 months of interrogation, the crew was eventually released. The United States and Britain found no evidence of war crimes committed by U-977 or its crew. Schäffer and his men had been submariners doing their duty, not SS officers or concentration camp guards. They had sunk no ships during their escape voyage. They had violated no international laws once the war ended, as they had been in transit and had surrendered peacefully when they reached neutral territory. Some crew members returned to Germany, making their way back to a homeland they barely recognized, divided into occupation zones, major cities in ruins, the economy destroyed, millions dead or displaced. They returned to families who had given them up for dead, to wives who had remarried believing themselves widows, to children who didn't recognize their fathers. Others chose to stay in South America, building new lives in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. They worked as mechanics, farmers, engineers, merchants. They married local women, learned Spanish, and tried to forget the war. Some succeeded. Others carried the weight of those 101 days at sea, and the 6 years of war before that, for the rest of their lives. Schäffer himself stayed in Argentina. He married an Argentine woman, started a family, and worked in various businesses. He became something of a minor celebrity, though he disliked the attention. Tourists and journalists would occasionally track him down, asking about Hitler, about Nazi gold, about the conspiracy theories. He would patiently explain, once again, that there were no conspiracies, just a young commander who had refused to surrender and a crew that had trusted him enough to follow. "We were not heroes," he said in interviews late in his life. "We were not villains. We were simply men who wanted to survive." U-977 itself, the submarine that had defied surrender, defied time, defied the ocean, was eventually handed over to the United States Navy as war reparations. American engineers studied it extensively, examining the schnorkel system, the battery design, the hull construction, learning from German technology to improve their own submarines. In November 1946, after all useful information had been extracted, U-977 was towed out into the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Massachusetts. It was used as a target ship for practice torpedo attacks by the U.S. Navy submarine USS Atchell. Multiple torpedoes struck U-977, and the old U-boat that had survived 7,500 miles of ocean, 66 days submerged, and countless near misses with death, finally sank beneath the waves, disappearing into the depths like a chapter of history swallowed by the sea. Legacy. Today, U-977 rests somewhere on the Atlantic seabed, its exact location unknown. Its hull is slowly dissolving in the salt water, collapsing inward, becoming part of the ocean floor. Sediment covers its conning tower. Fish swim through its compartments where 32 men once struggled to survive. Rust consumes the steel that once protected them. Nature reclaims what war created. But its story lives on, a tale of courage and fear, rebellion and desperation, adventure and mystery. A submarine that sailed into legend. A crew that refused to surrender when the world told them to. A journey that became one of the greatest escapes in naval history. The conspiracy theories persist even today. Every few years, a new book or documentary appears, claiming to have proof that U-977 carried Hitler to South America, or Nazi gold, or secret weapons. Historians patiently debunk these claims with evidence, testimony, and logic. But legends are more powerful than facts, and some people will always believe there was more to the story. Perhaps that's fitting. Because U-977's true significance isn't about conspiracies or treasure. It's about human nature, about loyalty and survival, about the impossible choices people face when their world ends, about the lengths men will go to avoid surrendering their freedom, even when that freedom is an illusion. Heinz Schäffer died in 2003 in Buenos Aires, at the age of 83. His obituary appeared in newspapers around the world. Some called him a hero. Others called him a deserter. Most called him a survivor. His story, and the story of U-977, continues to fascinate historians, submarine enthusiasts, and anyone who appreciates tales of human endurance against impossible odds. And long after the war ended, one truth remains: U-977 did not simply escape Germany. It escaped the end of a world, and sailed into the unknown, carrying with it the dreams, fears, and desperate hopes of 32 men who refused to accept defeat. In the vast archives of naval history, among the thousands of ships and submarines that served in World War II, U-977 occupies a unique place, not for battles won or enemies destroyed, but for a journey that should have been impossible, undertaken by men who should have surrendered but chose instead to sail toward an uncertain freedom. The ghost ship became real. The legend became history. And the submarine that refused to die lived on in memory long after it sank beneath the waves for the final time.